What this man is holding between his fingers is a molar of Gigantopithecus, the most enigmatic hominid species that has ever existed. Maybe seen like this, it doesn't seem like much to you, but here you can see how it compares with a human molar. It's almost 3 times bigger. In fact, it's believed that Gigantopithecus blacki, which is the official name of the species, was the largest primate that has ever existed in the history of the planet, with height estimates reaching up to 3.7 meters and weighing up to 300 kilograms. That's more than twice as tall and 3 times as heavy as humans. A terrifying creature that coexisted in the same area with our ancestors, and with an appearance very similar to beasts like the Yeti or Bigfoot. So could they be related? Today, they are legends without any scientific support. But is it possible that there is some truth to them? Could they have been a reality that tormented our ancestors for thousands of years? Very, very few remains of Gigantopithecus have been found. Only a few teeth and 4 pieces of jawbone. Fortunately, these remains are among the best you can find for performing allometry calculations, the discipline responsible for studying how the size of small bones relates to the rest of the body. Fortunately, it turns out to be a fairly reliable technique, since it has been proven that the proportions tend to remain quite consistent. Among existing species, the proportions are maintained, so extrapolating to extinct species whose anatomy we do not know is a common practice in paleontology. In other words, there are very few animals that have large teeth and small bodies, so such enormous teeth surely belong to a monstrous animal. All the remains have been found in the same region of the planet, southern China and its surroundings. And here, inevitably, it's necessary to point out that both the Yeti and the lesser-known Chinese Yeren are associated with these regions. Careful, don't jump to conclusions. I haven't said anything yet. Everyone knows the Yeti, but little is known about the Yeren, which I think is more relevant to our discussion today. It's described as a creature with the appearance of an ape man that inhabits mountainous and remote regions of China, with the Shenongjia Forest District being the most famous location. Wild, strong, and fast beings that live in mountain caves and only come down to raid villages in search of food or women. Oral traditions and literature about the Yeren and similar creatures have persisted for millennia in Chinese folklore. And this is where science and anthropology have something to say. The likelihood that a species of gigantic ape still exists today, hidden in the remote forests of China, is similar to the likelihood that, somewhere in an unknown location, there is still a tribe of Neanderthals yet to be discovered. 0. However, let's remember what the greatest advantage of the human species is: the intergenerational persistence of knowledge. If a chimpanzee learns to make and use a tool, something that has been documented in the wild, it will hardly be able to verbalize, communicate, and therefore preserve that knowledge with other members of its tribe. Chimpanzee civilization could have started several times in the last millennia, but their inventions remain stagnant forever. Because even though they learn simple ideas from each other, like for example using a stone to crack shells, they lack the abstract language necessary to transmit complex ideas. For them, each generation has to start over from the same rung, and each of these civilizations dies with the individual who started it. But humans are different. Each generation preserves and transmits all the knowledge generated, and the next generation has the knowledge accumulated over millennia by previous generations, which has been transmitted through language, through stories, through legends. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Literally, giants who may have lived alongside the first storytellers, the founders of our civilization. The production of tools, agriculture, fire, all these stories have endured to this day. Could the same have happened with those of the Gigantopithecus? Well, it's extremely unlikely that they were passed down orally, since the humans who coexisted with it were erectus, not sapiens, and the exchange of complex information between human species was very limited, if not non-existent. But there is another way to preserve information, the so-called geomythology. A fascinating science that studies how geological phenomena, including fossils, can influence the oldest human myths. Because if we have found the remains of the monster, our ancestors from tens of thousands of years ago probably did too, and in better condition. With all the imagination and time they had, that's probably where legends of giant hairy humanoids began to take shape, stories that were told again after being forgotten for millennia. And even though we no longer depend on campfires and oral traditions, the amount of data we handle today is so massive that sometimes the key details slip away from us. Previously I was attached to a science. Can one do science? Now I can focus on the flow of the idea and not so much on taking notes. Now back to our giant. What was he like? In the past, he was considered a kind of human, although now we know that he was a distant relative of orangutans, thanks to protein sequencing that was done on a very well-preserved tooth sample. A key debate is if he walked upright. Due to his link to orangutans, he was likely mostly quadrupedal, standing upright mainly in danger to intimidate or as a stance. Puntual en situaciones de peligro para dar miedo o... Therefore, the study of his jaw suggested that it seemed to have a special shape to allow for a trachea and vertebral columns with orientations similar to those of humans, that is, for a being that mainly walked on two legs. But the methodology of this study was widely questioned, so for now it can't be taken very seriously. The reality is that until we find more bones, we won't be able to clarify anything. Where are those bones? Why are only jaws and teeth preserved? Well, because the porcupines ate them. Literally, yes. These animals, which are so abundant in those areas of China, are famous for eating the bones of other animals to get calcium. But the jaws and especially the teeth are too hard for them. Added to this is the fact that since ancient times, the teeth and possible bones of the Gigantopithecus have been sold as dragon bones in the traditional medicine of the area. In fact, the first remains of the species were discovered not in an archaeological site or a cave, but in a shop in Hong Kong that sold them as dragon teeth. Who knows how long the remains of the giant have been sold? It's almost a miracle that there are still things left to find at the sites. And if at any point there were other remains, besides jaws and teeth, that had survived the porcupines, they were probably used in some kind of ancient therapy many years ago. In fact, it is believed that the first human migrations contributed to their extinction, although the main reason was a climate change. Coinciding with their approximate date of disappearance, about 215,000 years ago, there was a change in the pattern of rains and monsoons in southern China that caused the jungle, their natural habitat, to give way to grasslands. This would fit with the fact that in the most recent tooth samples, abrupt changes in dietary patterns and chronic nutritional stress are observed. Let's go. Let's say the poor things starved to death because they couldn't adapt to their climate change. If they had been able to swim to Indonesia or the Philippines, places that kept those climates, things would have been very different. It would be incredible to see with our own eyes such a gigantic distant cousin if it really was that big. The thing is, allometry, as I mentioned before, isn't always accurate. There are some early hominids that showed post-canine megadontia, an evolutionary phenomenon in which the teeth behind the canines are disproportionately large compared to the front teeth. If this were the case with Gigantopithecus, then we'd be looking at a small orangutan with big teeth. It's not the most likely scenario, but it can't be ruled out. We need more remains, a femur, a pelvis, a vertebra, but there might not be any left. Only time will tell. Until then, all we have left are the legends. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching the video and goodbye.